Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel HFY Phantom Girl, where mysterious alien girl choose human over entire galaxy. Don't forget to like, comment and share this video. Let's begin.
Sivrath tasted the station dying before the alarms found their voice. It came in as a chemical signature first, something between oxidized copper and the molecular stress of structural polymers being worked past. The air in the analysis chamber told the story before the instruments did. Something was wrong in the bones of Concordance Station Veth 9, and it was. Sivrath uncoiled from the monitoring cradle and let the full length of their body feel the floor, the way their brood parents had taught them. The floor was speaking in a frequency that had no good translation. The alarms came then, late as they always were. Sound mooring systems, calibrated for species with functional auditory channels. Sivrath tasted the alarm rather than heard it, a sharp acetaldehyde spike in the recycled air that meant the station's warning protocols had. This was the difficulty with multi-species infrastructure. Someone had always optimized for the wrong sense. The resonance cascade had begun in the communication array's lower housing. Sivrath knew this because the vibration signature in the floor told them, not because any of the 47 acoustic sensors they had personally. The sensors were calibrated for known frequencies. This was not a known frequency. This was the harmonic profile of a system that had begun to talk to itself, loop its own output back through the input housing, amplify, reloop. An acoustic Ouroboros that the original designers had never modeled because the species that built the communication array evolved in a world with no. They had built something that could sing. They had simply never imagined it would. Sivrath moved to the primary analysis station and began the suppression protocols. First attempt. Frequency-targeted dampening field at 14.7 kth. The cascade absorbed it. Second attempt. Counter-resonance burst at the harmonic inverse. The cascade shifted 11 kth upward and continued. Third attempt. Full airy shutdown, which should have eliminated the signal source entirely. The cascade had already propagated into the station's secondary infrastructure grid, which meant the source was now the station itself. Shutting down the array was like cutting off a scream at the throat after it had already entered the room. 40 breath count cycles until hull integrity began to fail. This was what the mathematics said. The mathematics in Sivrath's experience had never been optimistic. 3. Suppression protocols failed in as many breath counts. Sivrath noted this in the incident log. Not because documentation was the priority, but because the Vethsol mind did not function well. The older systems were already asking. 37 cycles. The chamber door opened. The human was late. This was the first fact. She had been contracted to arrive at the station 17 breath counts ago before the cascade began, which meant her presence would have been. Language that meant the administrator had been surprised once and did not know how to classify the experience. Sivrath had not known what to do with the flag. They had filed it under supplementary personnel, non-standard, and moved on. The human in the doorway was not theoretical. She was tall by most species' reckoning, though the Vethsol did not measure height, measuring instead the chemical footprint a body left in a room. Hers was unusual. Traces of a petroleum derivative compound that her species apparently used on their skin in desiccated environments. Traces. Comfort did not belong in the chemical palette of a crisis. Sivrath noted this and moved on. Adeyemi, the human said, by way of introduction or explanation or both. She looked at the readout panels without appearing to see the crisis in them. Or perhaps she saw it and the seeing did not change her face. Acoustic contractor. Sorry I'm late. She was not sorry. Sivrath could taste the chemical composition of her apology, and it was entirely absent of the cortisol signatures that genuine regret produced. She was not sorry because she was already looking past the apology at whatever was making the floor vibrate. She crouched. Put her open palm flat against the deck plating. Sivrath's stripes shifted pale blue, interrupted concentration, and they turned fully. The resonance cascade has propagated into the secondary grid. They said. Counter-frequency attempts have failed. Full array suppression was. The source is now diffused throughout the station's infrastructure. A pause. The mathematics suggest this situation is not salvageable by known acoustic intervention methods. The human nodded. She was still touching the floor. "What does it feel like?" she asked. Sivrath processed this for 0.4 breath counts. "Feel like," they repeated. "The vibration." "What does it feel like to you?" "I do not feel vibration in the manner you are implying. I taste acoustic events as chemical signatures propagating through." Sivrath stopped. This was not the relevant information. The frequency signature suggests a self-reinforcing harmonic loop with an adaptive component. It changes when countered. "Yeah," she stood. And then she unslung the case. The second fact was the case. Sivrath's analytical mind noted it and could not file it. The case was not metal. It was not a containment unit. It was not any recognizable category of professional equipment. It was made of something brown and fibrous and battered in the specific way that equipment becomes battered when it is carried everywhere by someone. The strap had been repaired at least twice with materials that did not match the original. The latch was scratched 7 distinct gouge marks. She set the case on the analysis console with a familiar ease, as if she had set it on many consoles in many crises and had always picked it back up. "Let me hear it," she said. Sivrath's stripe flickered. "I do not understand the request. Play the cascade for me. Whatever your best output modality is, speaker, transducer, whatever you've got, play it." 36 breath count cycles. Sivrath played. The sound that came from the speakers was not like anything that should exist inside a station designed for habitation. A low cycling moan that shifted pitch with a slow grinding patience. The frequency of something very large being asked to hold a shape it was never. Sivrath watched the readout panels because looking at the readout panels was the appropriate response to a crisis. They did not look at the human. The human closed her eyes. This was the first thing Sivrath had no category for. She stood in front of speakers broadcasting a frequency that was, by any reasonable acoustic assessment, actively destructive to biological hearing. She stood in front of it without shielding, and she closed her eyes. She listened. Not analyzed. Not processed. Listened, the way Sivrath had once observed an alien species engaging with what they called music, a concept Sivrath had categorized. Filed. The chemical composition of the room was shifting. Sivrath's sensors tracked it automatically, the ambient cortisol equivalents from the remaining crew in the corridor outside, elevated and spiking. The metallic trace of the cascade's acoustic damage to the station's polymer structures. And from the human something else. Something warm and purposeless that Sivrath's systems kept returning to without resolution. Not fear concentration. Not calculation focus. Something with a warmth component that no analytical bin would accept. 34 cycles. It's in 7/4, she said. Sivrath did not know what that meant. The time signature, the loop. She opened her eyes. It's cycling in 7/4 time, which is unusual for mechanical resonance. 7/4 doesn't happen by accident. Something in the original design created a preference for it. She tilted her head. The cascade moaned on. It's almost pretty, isn't it? Sivrath's dorsal stripe went so pale it was nearly white. It is destroying the station. Sure. She did not appear troubled by this. She crouched again and put her palm on the floor again, and the floor spoke its 7/4 language up through her skin and her eyes went. They could not stop watching her. The rest of the crew, the 3 technicians still in the corridor, visible through the chamber's partial transparency panel, had not stopped moving. They moved with the specific kinetics of fear and function, the way all species moved when the body's older systems had taken partial control, rapid. Sivrath recognized it because they had been doing the same thing. Every Vithsal who had survived long enough to develop tool use had those same kinetics written into them. The human was not moving. She was crouched with her palm flat on the deck, and her eyes on something Sivrath could not see, and she was completely still, and the stillness was. Sivrath had seen paralysis in various species. Paralysis had a chemical signature, a cortisol spike followed by metabolic suppression, the body shutting down systems to concentrate resources. ADME's chemical signature was the same steady concentration warmth it had been since she walked through the door. The stillness was chosen. She was being still because being still was the correct tool for this moment, the same way she would pick up an instrument when the moment required. Then she did the thing. It was a quiet thing. It should not have mattered. She hummed a single note, low in her chest, shaped by closed lips, sustained for perhaps 2 breath counts. The note was precisely calibrated in a way that could not have been accidental, tuned to something she had heard in the speakers and understood. Not enough to show on the readouts as anything other than a microvariance, but Sivarath detected it in the floor in the chemical signature of the air that changed, briefly, by a fraction of a molecular percentage. The cascade had dropped in frequency and then returned. It had responded to the sound she made with her body. It had responded to a human woman's hum, the way it had not responded to 3 carefully designed suppression protocols. Sivarath looked at her throat, the external signal of an internal acoustic architecture that her species had developed to a level of precision that no classified literature had. The visual was not diagnostic. Sivarath watched it the way they would watch a sensor reading that was saying something they did not yet know how to interpret with the full, "I do not feel," Sivarath said, and then stopped, because this was not precisely true. "I taste acoustic events as chemical signatures, and yes, I tasted it." She looked at them, not with the carefully too wide attention that most non-Vethsal species used when trying not to stare at the bioluminescent stripe. Directly, the way a diagnostic looked at a readout. "Good," she said, and reached for the case latch. Sivarath counted the scratches. 1, 2. The 7th gouge was deepest, cut at an angle. They studied the brass fittings very carefully and did not look at what she was removing from the case. They were not ready, yet, to look at that. The cascade was a song. Sivarath had not had this thought before. They had it now and could not take it back. It sat in the analytical center of their processing like a foreign object in a smooth surface. Obviously wrong, impossible to ignore, reshaping. She had played 1 chord on the instrument. 1 chord, a specific combination of frequencies, sounded simultaneously from different strings of different lengths at different tensions. Wood and wire and the sustained tension of mechanical physics, a technology so primitive it should have been beneath notice. And she had played it, and the cascade had dropped 4 keth in 3/4 of a breath count and come back slower than it had left. Sivarath had watched her play it, had not been able to not watch. The instrument she called a guitar had surprised them anyway, the curved body of it resonating in her arms, the precise positioning of her fingers. The guitar itself was not young. Sivarath could assess material age through chemical signature, the gradual oxidation of organic compounds over time, the specific breakdown. Not old by Vthsal standards, perhaps, but old by human ones, old enough to have accumulated the kind of wear that only came from consistent. The body had small marks along its edges, places where it had made contact with things while being carried or stored or played. The tuning machines at the top, small mechanical adjustments for the string tensions, had a patina of use on the parts most frequently touched. Someone had spent a significant portion of their life with this instrument. Sivarath's analytical mind tried to calculate what that meant, given that humans lived approximately 90 to 100 cycles in favorable. The guitar might have been played for 30-40 cycles. Every one of those cycles adding something to the wood, to the tone, to whatever acoustic qualities developed in a resonating body when it was. A 30-cycle-old resonating chamber of seasoned organic material, specifically shaped for acoustic output, with a human who knew its particular. And then the 4 keth drop and the cascade coming back slower, as if it had been briefly shown something that confused it. Sivarath's stripe had gone amber, the color of recalculation, their body telling the truth their mind was still catching up to. "You translated the cascade," Sivarath said. They had been staring at the frequency readouts and trying to find the correct framing for what had just happened. "I'm translating us into its language," she corrected, without looking up from the key chart she was annotating. "There's a difference. We're not." She glanced at the hull integrity readout. 41% and dropping, and then looked back at her paper without the surface of her face. Let me show you the approach. The chord she played was not the same as the first. It was related. Sivrath's analytical systems confirmed it shared two frequencies with the prior chord, but the relationship was motion rather than a sound that leaned forward. A sound with intention. Sivrath did not know how they knew this. They knew it the way they knew a chemical signature, directly, as fact arriving fully formed from somewhere below the analytical mind. The cascade dropped 4 keth. Held. We play into it, Adeyemi said, not against it. We find where it wants to go and we lead it there, carefully. She let the chord decay. Watched the cascade restabilize. Your suppression attempts were all correct. Technically, they just assumed the cascade was an error to be corrected. It is an error, Sivrath said. It will destroy the station. Sure, but that's not all it is. She looked at the speaker array. Her face did the thing Sivrath could not classify, the thing that kept arriving in formats for which no analytical bin existed. It's a system in resonance with itself. It's doing exactly what resonance systems do. You can't fight that. You can only give it somewhere better to go. There was a word in Vethsal, a very old word, from before spaceflight, from before contact with any other species, that meant the specific. But you are walking through something other than what you thought, and the wrongness is not in the data. It is in you. Sivrath reached for this word. Found it. It was insufficient. You built instruments, they said. The observation had been sitting in the analysis queue since the case appeared on the console, as a species, across multiple independent cultures and developmental timelines. You built devices whose primary function is to generate non-utilitarian sound patterns. Sound that serves no predator evasion purpose. Sound that communicates no survival-critical information. Sivrath's stripe deepened to amber. You built this because your world was loud, and you chose to answer it. Yeah, she said. 2 letters, flat and matter-of-fact. The cascade's fundamental frequency is 63 keth. In your system, what is this? About a B-flat. Little flat, actually. A pause. That's a dark key. B-flat minor is, never mind. It's useful. The cascade wants to resolve in a specific direction. We can use that. We built walls, Sivrath said, against sound. In our architecture, our signal damping systems, our entire acoustic engineering tradition. The amber deepened further. We built walls, you built. And moved on immediately to the next technical question, as if she had not just described the entire difference between 2 species' relationships. Sivrath filed the observation under a category they had just constructed. It did not have a name yet. They worked, and the cascade held its frequency, and the amber in their stripe did not fade. The cascade adapted. Not the small micro-shifts that had defeated Sivrath's suppression protocols. This was structural change. At 17 remaining breath count cycles, the cascade jumped 3 full harmonics simultaneously, a chord of destruction that rattled the analysis. The floor, which had been speaking in low cycling rhythms, began to speak in fragments. Hull integrity dropped to 34% in 2 breath counts. Sivrath's stripe went white, not pale. White, the full panic signal, the color their body produced when the analytical mind had run out of road and the older systems were taking over. The older systems said, move. They said, the egress by the South Junction, the escape protocols, the pods in the North Ring. The older systems were extremely specific. They had been refined over millions of cycles of a species learning very carefully how to not die. Sivrath did not move. They were standing next to Adeyemi, and Adeyemi had not moved, and this was not a rational reason to stay in a room that was going to stop being. The analytical mind knew this. The analytical mind had the egress route mapped, the pod-to-personal ratio confirmed, the timeline calculated with a precision that left no. The notation of this fact did not help, and was not meant to. The escape pods. 3 of the crew had already gone. Sivrath had told them to go and had meant it. The crew was not the station. The crew could survive. Sivrath had given the order with the authority of a senior analyst who understood the mathematics of evacuation and the mathematics of hull. They had given the order. They had not followed it. This was a new data point about their own behavior, and it arrived in Sivrath's analytical center with the quality of a sensor reading. And then Adeyemi opened the case again. The second instrument was smaller, circular, with a membrane stretched across a frame of dark wood. The membrane had been played so many times and in so many different conditions that it had developed a patina of use, heaviest near the center. Someone had played this instrument 10,000 times, perhaps more. The calculation seemed wrong until Sivrath remembered that humans lived a long time and apparently spent significant portions of that time making. Then the calculation seemed not wrong at all. It seemed inevitable. The case had held 2 instruments. One guitar, built to produce sustained harmonics across a broad frequency range. One drum, built to produce percussive pulses, rhythmic markers, timing signals, the kind of sound that gave other sounds a structure to exist inside. Together they covered most of the functional range of acoustic expression that Sivrath could imagine. One for harmony, one for rhythm, one for finding what the problem sounded like, one for driving the response to it. She had packed them both, deliberately, before coming to this station. Before she knew what the problem would be. She had simply known, from experience, that she would need both, or that she might, and that the cost of carrying an extra instrument was lower than. Sivrath's analytical mind tried to categorize this as professional thoroughness. The category would not close. Something about it was more specific than thoroughness, more personal, more like the worn latch and the 7th gouge in the guitar that had been. Something that was not just preparation, but the expression of a relationship between a person and their tools, between a person and the kind. Her voice was level in a way that the white light of Sivrath's stripe was not. Good, I adapt too. Sivrath looked at the drum, at the worn membrane, at the hands holding it, hands that had been doing this long enough that the motion of picking it up had the quality of something that required no. Why do you carry 2 instruments? Sivrath asked. She set the drum on her knee, positioned the guitar within reach, looked at the frequency readouts with an attention that had never, in the duration of their working together, looked like fear. One for the problem, she said. One for when the problem gets worse. The cascade screamed. The chamber walls vibrated in a register that Sivrath's body classified, automatically and without consultation, as wrong. Something from before. Something from before the analytical mind. Sivrath's 7 auditory membranes, which were not their primary sensory channel, but were present and functional, registered the new triple harmonic. The 5th membrane flickered off. Sivrath had not known it could do that. Sivrath's older systems said egress. The older systems were being overridden by something without a name. The threat had a plateau. Sivrath knew this because the readouts said so, and because the floor said so, and because Adeyemi had put down both instruments and was simply running frequency comparisons with a stylus and paper, physical paper, from inside the case, covered in handwritten notes in a personal notation. A language she had made for herself, for exactly this kind of problem, built from decades of other problems and the specific shortcuts her mind had. Sivrath could not read it. They observed it anyway. The cascade had hit a stable frequency and was holding. It would not hold long. But for perhaps 10 breath count cycles, the immediate emergency had plateaued into something that was merely very serious. Sivrath updated the damage assessment, updated suppression options, updated the structural integrity report that had been waiting for attention since the cascade began. They worked with the methodical precision that their analytical mind defaulted it to when the older system stood down, the precision of a Vethsol. The work was the thing Sivrath did when they needed to remember that they were competent and this competence had value. Adeyemi was humming. It took Sivrath 20 breath counts to realize they had been cataloging the hum's frequency for the entirety of those 20 breath counts. Not because it was relevant to the crisis, not because it had any bearing on the suppression approach they were developing. They had been cataloging it the way their chemosensors cataloged ambient atmospheric composition automatically as background process as a thing. The analytical center, occupied with the structural integrity report, had apparently not been consulted on this decision. The hum sat at approximately 61 keth. It varied. It was not consistent. It drifted upward and then settled, upward and settled, in patterns that had no mathematical regularity but never wandered, like a thing that knew where it lived, like a thing that was at home in the frequency it inhabited and felt no particular need to justify its presence there. She did not know she was doing it. Sivrath was certain of this because they had now observed her long enough to understand that when she did something deliberately, she looked at it. She was looking at her notes. The humming was happening somewhere she was not looking, in the same body that held the mind focused on the frequency charts, operating on its own, a second process running in parallel, below the level of conscious attention. The Vethsal had evolved in environments where sound was predator signature, where silence was the proof of safety. Every acoustic event was information to be processed and assessed and responded to. Sivrath had 17 sensors calibrated for threat-relevant frequency detection, standard for their species, reflecting the deep ancestral. They had been cataloging a human's unconscious humming for 20 breath counts. Their threat detection architecture had classified it as not a threat, as something else, as something that Sivrath did not have a category label ready for, something that kept arriving in the analytical queue as unclassified, flagged. The review kept being postponed. The cascade held its plateau. ADME's stylus moved across the paper. The hum drifted up a keth and settled back, and then she stopped. The silence was not silence. The cascade was still present in the background. The station's low-frequency distress. The circulation vent's small mechanical whisper. All of these were present. None of them were the things Sivrath noticed was absent. The hum had stopped, and this absence arrived in Sivrath's awareness with the quality of a change in atmospheric composition, something the body registered before. Something that made the chemosensors recalibrate toward a baseline that was now, apparently, different from the baseline that had existed before she. Sivrath looked at her hands. They were resting on the guitar strings, not playing, just resting. The fingers curved slightly, an echo of playing posture, as if the hands were not entirely done. "Why do you make sound when there is no function for it?" Sivrath asked. She looked up. This was the 4th time she had done so, and Sivrath had counted all 4 times, which was a process they had not authorized. She thought about the question, actually thought the pause of someone checking the answer against their own understanding, not searching for a polite response. "Because silence gets heavy," she said. Sivrath processed this. "Silence is the correct state," they said. The Vethsal concept of Sethval, a productive quiet. The correct silence that follows threat is the state to which all acoustic sound is information to be processed. Non-functional sound is noise. Noise is waste. "On your world," Adeyemi said, and her voice was not challenging. Curious in the way something is curious when it wants to understand rather than win. Was it quiet? "We evolved in seismic silence. Our world has very little atmospheric sound propagation. What sound exists is almost entirely predator-sourced. We evolved chemosensory primary analysis because sound was not information we could trust. Sound was the last thing you heard." She nodded slowly, looked at her hands on the strings. "On mine," she said, "it was never quiet. Wind, rain, animals, other people. A pause with texture in it. We evolved in a world that was loud, and we sang back." Sivrath's stripe flickered. Amber. The recalculation color. The cascade, on the readouts behind her, held its plateau for 4 more breath counts. And then the numbers moved. Hull integrity. 34%. The number arrived before the physical sensation, which meant the cascade had accelerated faster than the sensors could track in real time. The floor went from speaking to screaming. The analysis chamber walls flexed, actually flexed, a visual phenomenon that Sivrath's species had a very old and very specific fear response. The cascade had jumped to triple harmonics simultaneously, 3 interlocking frequency loops, each reinforcing the others, each adaptive in its own. Sivrath's systems tried to model a counter-approach and returned 3 separate results, each requiring resources the station no longer had in time. The color of the oldest fear. Not the pale blue of interrupted work or the amber of recalculation, or even the bright crisis white of serious danger. This was the white. ADME was moving through the acoustic data without apparent hurry, hands on the instruments, checking positions. Her face doing the things Sivrath still could not classify, not calm in the performed sense, not calm in the suppressed fear sense that most. Her cortisol-equivalent markers were elevated but not at crisis threshold. Her hands were not shaking. Hull integrity, 31%. The lower ring issued a sound that Sivrath's sensors classified as structural deformation beginning. The lower ring housed the tertiary life support systems, the emergency power distribution nodes, and approximately 42% of the stations. It was beginning to become a different shape than its designers had intended. Designers who had not intended this, who had built something that could sing and had never considered what would happen when it decided to. "What?" Sivrath said, and stopped, because the sentence had no useful continuation that their analytical mind could locate. Adeyemi sat down. She sat down on the floor. The shaking, compromised, 31% integrity floor of a station in active structural failure, cross-legged, guitar in her lap, eyes closed. Sivrath looked at the egress panels. The North Ring escape pods were still accessible. Their readouts showed 4 pods remaining. 4 Vethsol personnel still aboard, including Sivrath. 3 technicians in the corridor outside. The mathematics was clean, as mathematics always was, maintaining its precision while everything around it came apart. Sivrath did not move. They stayed and watched her sitting on the failing floor and tried to understand what they were doing. The analytical mind could account for many reasons to remain in a compromised space, incomplete data, hope of salvageable assets, calculation. None of these were accurate. The analytical mind tried them and discarded them because the actual reason was simpler and less defensible. Sivrath did not want to leave while she. This was a new category of behavioral data. Sivrath noted it, filed it under. Unknown variable, requires extended investigation, do not act on without further analysis. Then stayed anyway. The floor spoke its 7-4 language through the soles of their body where it lay against the deck. The cascade was everywhere now, not just in the communication array, not just in the secondary grid, but in the walls, the support structures. Every system the station had was resonating. Every system that could vibrate was vibrating. The station had become its own instrument, in the worst possible sense, playing a frequency that its hull integrity ratings had not been designed. She was sitting in the middle of it, cross-legged, patient. The guitar was in her lap and her hands were on the strings, and she was not playing, not yet just holding. Sivrath watched the posture and tried to analyze it and kept arriving at the same non-analytical conclusion. She looked like someone who had done. This particular shape of being ready without being tense? How many crises had it taken to develop that posture? What are you doing? The question came out with more force than was strictly professional, more than the situation's professional framings allowed for. The lower ring is deforming. Hull integrity is at 31% and dropping. The escape pods, "I'm listening," she said, eyes still closed. The station issued another structural sound. A harmonic at 96 Keth, a subharmonic at 48, and a very high overtone at 384 that Sivrath's sensors could. An inadvertent instrument, the station, playing the frequencies of its own dissolution. She was listening to it. The floor vibrated under her crossed legs, and she sat in the vibration with her hands on the guitar strings, and she listened to the station failing. Sivrath counted the vibration intervals in the floor. 7, 8. 7 again. A pause. The same. 7, 4. Even in its catastrophic acceleration, the cascade held to its strange time signature. The pattern she had named in the first moments, it had not changed. She had heard that. She was hearing it now. "What does it sound like?" Sivrath asked. The question was the same as before, but was not the same question. "Like something trying to find the end of a sentence," she said, eyes still closed. "It knows where it wants to go. It's just..." A pause. "Lost?" The station groaned. The floor spoke its fragmented, urgent language. She listened. She began to play, not against the cascade, not in opposition to it, not targeting it with the clinical precision of a counter-frequency protocol. She found its rhythm, that strange 7/4, that insistent loop with its harmonic preference, and she matched it. Not perfectly. The guitar could not produce the exact frequencies the cascade had achieved. Wood and wire and the resonant body of a handmade instrument had. Close enough that Sivrath's sensors registered the cascade, for the first time in its entire duration, reacting to something other than... It had always adapted in response to being opposed. When counter-frequencies arrived, it moved. When dampening fields engaged, it shifted. A system that responded to resistance with reconfiguration, and every response had been an escalation. She did not oppose it. She accompanied it. The cascade adjusted to the new presence, moved toward her frequency rather than away from it. Sivrath watched the readouts and watched the numbers, and could not, for 3.2 breath counts, understand what they were seeing. Then they understood. The adaptive, self-reinforcing multi-harmonic resonance loop that had defeated every technical suppression protocol Sivrath had applied, that had, not because she was forcing it, not because the physics demanded it, because she had found its preference, its deep structural wanting, its 7/4 insistence on a specific resolution, and she was offering it a path. Sivrath's ancestral axiom: sound is danger. Sound is the last thing you hear. The correct state is silence. The productive quiet is the goal. The axiom had been built from a world where sound was predator, where silence was survival, where the species that could quiet itself most completely was the species that lived long enough to build tools. All of Vethsal history was a refinement of that first, deep lesson: be quiet, be still, and you will live. Adeyemi had not grown up on that world. She had grown up on a world that was never quiet. Wind and rain and animals and other people. And she had said, we sang back. Her species had heard a loud world and had not quieted themselves to survive it. They had answered it, matched it, added to it, built systems. And now she was saying it to the cascade. Note by note, she led it. Not all at once. Not with the sudden violence of a counter-frequency blast. One note at a time, a gentle redirection, the way Sivrath had once observed a very experienced chemist redirect a reactive flow, providing. The cascade's triple harmonics began to converge, not eliminated, converged, moving toward each other, toward a single point, toward the resolution that the 7/4 structure had been seeking since the beginning. 3 lines on the readout becoming 2, 2 becoming 1. Hull integrity, 41%. Climbing, Sivrath's stripe went dark, not white. Not pale blue or amber. Dark, the complete absence of bioluminescent signal, which in Vethsal physiology indicated either complete shutdown or complete capacity. In a medical context, it meant the body was using every resource for something critical. It had never, before this moment, happened without a survival context. The body had never before found something that required all of it that was not a threat. The cascade's single remaining harmonic was at 63 Keth. B flat, slightly flat, the key it had always wanted. Adeyemi found it on the guitar, found it exactly wood and wire, producing a frequency so close to the cascade's own that Sivrath's sensors. And then she did not fight it or suppress it or declare victory. She played with it. 3 breath counts. She played alongside the cascade in its fundamental frequency, and the cascade, the adaptive, self-reinforcing, previously unsolvable resonance loop. It held the note with her, the way 2 very tired things might hold the same note, because neither of them had anywhere else to be. And then she let it go. She lifted her fingers from the strings. The guitar fell silent. The cascade went on for 0.7 breath counts alone. Then it, too, resolved. The way a sentence resolves when it finds its period. The way a question resolves when it receives the answer it was built to receive. The station went quiet. Hull integrity, 67% and climbing. The lower ring issued a series of settling sounds, structural complaint of a system renormalizing, finding its shape again. The frequency readouts showed a flat line, not the flat line of total suppression, which was its own kind of violence. The flat line of completion. Sivrath's stripe remained dark. They did not look at the readouts. They looked at Adeyemi's left hand, still curved on the guitar neck. Fingers not yet released from a position there was no longer any reason to hold. The posture of an ending. The body carrying the memory of the sound it had made, for the moment before it let go. The word Sethval arrived in Sivrath's analytical mind automatically. The productive silence. The correct quiet after a threat passes. Sivrath held the word, turned it over. It did not fit the inside of this moment. The silence was real. The cascade was gone. The threat resolved. The station breathing again. All the conditions for Sethval were satisfied. But the word was shaped for something that had always followed threats, and never followed this. Sivrath did not have another word. They looked at the hand on the guitar neck and stayed in the silence and understood with the slow certainty of a species encountering the edge. They did not have it yet. They stayed quiet and waited for it to arrive. The crew came back. They arrived in ones and twos over the course of 10 breath counts. First, the technicians from the North Corridor, then the bridge crew. They came back the way crew always came back after crises, carefully, with the specific mixture of relief and professional obligation that all. Sivrath watched them arrive and noted the atmospheric chemistry shifting, cortisol-equivalent markers dropping across the board, the chemical. The station's air would take many breath count cycles to clear fully. Sivrath would taste the crisis in it long after everyone else had stopped. Adeyemi filed her incident report on the primary console. Sivrath observed this process for 4 breath counts and was still not certain they had observed it correctly. The report was 4 lines. She had been on the station for 37 breath counts, had resolved a resonance cascade that the Concordance's senior acoustic analyst. Acoustic interference resolved via counter-harmonic application. Frequency cascade source identified in communication array secondary housing. Recommend structural review of lower ring. No personnel casualties. Sivrath read it 4 times. Then they opened their own incident report form. The standard form for acoustic crisis response had 47 fields. They had filled 32 of them during the crisis. The Vethsal mind maintaining documentation as a form of cognitive discipline, the filing. 32 fields of careful, precise, technically accurate observations about frequency propagation, suppression failures, adaptive cascade. The cursor sat at field 33. Resolution method, technical summary. The technical summary could be assembled from the data. Every frequency shift was logged, every hull integrity reading, every adaptive cascade response. The data was complete. The technical summary would not contain the 7 4-times signature and what she had said about it. It would not contain the way the cascade followed her guitar like a thing that had been waiting to be led. It would not contain the hand on the guitar neck with the fingers not yet released, or the 3 breath counts of playing alongside the cascade. The technical summary would say, counter-harmonic application at 63 Keth achieved resonance convergence and cascade resolution. This was... Sivrath was becoming certain it was also not the truth at all. They left field 33 empty. Adeyemi was packing the instruments back into the case. The guitar first settled into the shaped interior with the care of someone returning something to a place it knew. Then the drum. The latches. Sivrath had counted all 5. I need to file a technical summary, Sivrath said, of the resolution method. She waited. I am finding that the technical summary categories are insufficient. She looked at them for a moment. not with careful too wide attention. Directly, the cascade had a preference, she said, an inherent tendency toward resolution in a specific harmonic. All we did was give it a path. You found a preference in a resonance cascade, Sivrath said. You identified it by listening. You provided a pathway using an instrument you carry with you habitually. A pause. The instrument is made of wood. Old wood, she said. Something in her voice that was not quite humor and not quite affection and was not precisely any category Sivrath had a word for. The viewport was behind her. The gas giant below, enormous, banded in amber and cream, its surface a storm system the size of a small moon, its silence total at this distance. The station's orbit carried them around its terminator line, and the light changed as Sivrath watched. Dayside orange, the slow gradient. Beautiful, Sivrath's analytical mind said, and then was confused by having said it, because beautiful was not a category in the analysis suite. Beautiful was not in any of the 47 incident report fields. Beautiful was not a term Sivrath had applied to anything since. They tried to remember and could not find a previous instance. Will you play something else? Sivrath asked. Adeyemi was still. The case latch was in her hand, half closed. Not for the cascade, Sivrath said. Not for the station. Just the sentence had no technical completion available. They let it be incomplete. She looked at them for the 6th time. Then she set the case down. Opened the latch, 7 scratches, the 7th deepest. She took the guitar out with the same care she had used to put it away. She sat in the chair at the analysis console. Sivrath's console, the one she had set the case on when she arrived, an act that had felt like the guitar settled in her lap. She played. It was not a counter-harmonic. It was not a frequency-targeted application of acoustic physics. It was a piece of music which was, Sivrath now understood, the same thing and also an entirely different thing, the way a map and a territory. The music moved through the analysis chamber. Sivrath's 17 acoustic sensors registered it. Their chemosensors registered the changes in atmospheric composition that accompanied it, their own stress markers dropping, something they had not. The gas giant turned below. The light changed. The music continued. Sivrath opened the incident report. Field 33. Resolution method. Technical summary. They had left it empty. They looked at it for a long moment while the guitar spoke in frequencies that had no crisis to resolve and no function to serve and no engineering. They typed one word at the end of the report below all 47 fields. In a section the form had no label for. Beautiful. Filed it. The report transmitted to the Concordance archive with a small confirmatory tone. One word, filed under no category, attributed to Sivrath of the Vethsal, Senior Acoustic Analyst, Concordance Station Veth 9. A data point with no bin, a word that would sit in the archive until someone decided what it meant. The music continued. The station breathed around it. The gas giant turned in its ancient orbit, indifferent and enormous, while below it, a species that had learned to be quiet looked at a species. The guitar found a final chord and let it rest. The last overtones faded through the recycled air. The station's systems hummed in their ordinary registers. Adeyemi looked up. You okay? Sivrath considered this for a moment. Considered all the ways their analytical mind could approach it, diagnostically, clinically, with the precision of a Vethsal who had spent 30. I don't know, they said. She nodded, as if this was a complete answer. As if not knowing was something she had a category for, something she had encountered often enough to receive without alarm. Sivrath looked at the incident report on the screen. The one word, in its unlabeled field, the gas giant in the viewport, the scratched brass latch on the case, the 7th gouge, deepest, cut at an angle. They would go home eventually to their quarters, to their reports, to the long cycle of work that was a Vethsal acoustic analyst's life. They would file the complete documentation and answer the administrator's questions and resume the ordinary mathematics of resonance management. They would do all of these things with something different in them that had not been there before, something that did not have a name yet in any. The word Seth Val sat in Sivrath's vocabulary where it had always sat. The productive silence. The correct quiet. Next to it, now, was a space the shape of something that was not silence at all. Sivrath would find the word for it. Or they would not, and they would carry the shape of the absent word for the rest of their life, like a frequency that had resolved but left. Either way, they would not be going back to who they had been when the alarm first tasted the air and the floor first spoke its wrong language. The silence was not the correct silence. It was something better.
If you liked the video, subscribe my YouTube channel HFY Phantom Girl for more stories. Thank you.